Anime Girl tutorial, we are now going to look at the same character but from the side. That way you can get a better understanding of the curvature of the spine as well as the various curves and edges on our character. Same disclaimers as always, I'm using Clip Studio Paint. You can use any art program, or you can also just use pencil and paper. Doesn't really matter. Only keep in mind that if you're on pencil and paper, you're going to want to draw very, very, very lightly for your construction lines. That way, when you erase them, make corrections to the balance of your character and whatnot, you're not actually going to see any of those lines in the finished product. So draw very, very lightly. For me, on my lowermost layer, I'm just using a red G pen at 30% opacity. That way, if I accidentally try putting my actual line art on the same layer, it'll show up as a lot lower opacity than normal, and then it'll just catch right away that I'm doing something wrong. So, like always, we're going to start with a small circle. Your circle shape does not have to be perfect. It is just a placeholder. My circle is slightly too small because I'm just trying to keep this at the same size as the rest of my characters here. Then what I am going to do is, following the outermost thickest part of my circle here, I'm going to drop in a slightly curved line like so, and then I will drop in my jaw. And we can always do face tutorials later, so I can go through this and really sketch it out. For this, I'm not trying to do anything crazy here because this is just a figure study. What I will do though, I'm going to actually bring the head slightly back. So here's my circle, and I bring it just back a little bit so it's a little bit more ovular. And that is because the skull is a bit longer side on than it would be if you're just looking straight on. If you're looking straight on, it's a little bit more circular with semi-flattened edges. Whereas from the back like this, it's going to be a little bit of an oval shape. That's because your neck connects somewhere in here, and your skull comes out a little bit past it. However, this next portion, I cannot stress enough. We are just putting in a guideline / reference for our spinal column. This line is just notoriously very difficult to get perfect on your first go. So this line is going to be constantly changing as we're balancing our character around it. It's just here as a placeholder, so you do not have to get this perfect. But what we're going to do, we're going to swoop in. It's going to poke out a little bit. So in, poke out. Then we're going to swoop in like so into a curve that then comes straight back. So again, it is in, point, back in, curve like this outwards into a straight line like that. That's the general guide for our character's spinal line. What we'll do now is, just in this little pointed section, we're going to drop in our shoulders. That's because this little point is basically our guidepost for where the shoulder needs to go. From here, since she's not straight on, the shoulder line here is not actually going to be straight. It's going to come down slightly. So from the top of my shoulder, I'm going to bring a little line like so. From there, before I draw anything else, I'm going to put in the neck to be the way that I want it, connecting to the shoulder here. That way, I then know my collarbone basically needs to be right here, just in front of where that neck actually connects. From there, we're actually going to keep the rib cage flat and elongated like this. It's not as round from the front. It's a little bit flatter because this portion here is you're a little bit thinner from the side than you are from the front here, but wider than you are then typically. From here, you can drop in a little line that will help us drop our breasts in later. And yet again, our little head height here, we're basically going to pretend there's an entire head height right there, and roughly the midway point or just below, we'll drop in our hip line. And I can see that this character is slightly smaller than my other ones, so I'm just going to make my character a little bit bigger to match. If you're doing this like on your own with pencil or paper, you can always just connect the lines like this to get it, but for me, I'm just trying to show them one at a time so you can see the process should you just be doing this as a standalone thing. Now, what I like to do is that since your female characters are going to have a curvier spine, they're kind of shaped like this, right? So because of that, the hips are actually going to be behind the widest portion of our ribcage here. So I'm just going to put in my placeholder, and the shape I'm going for is basically the same shape that you'd see from the very side, but now it's just coming in like so. Then I swoop in, stopping at this straight line. Connect just for my own purposes. From here, we can enlarge this. Well, I guess I can just enlarge it a little tiny bit here. Get it better balance here. From there, this is the front portion of our hips, so this is like the area that's not going to move. I'm going to put in a leg circle and drop a straight line for my leg. Now, before I move on, I'm going to attach the belly. So, I'm going to follow my rib cage down like this. So I'm curling it in slightly. From here, where the belly button would be, I'm actually going to come back out and in. Okay. Now, depending on the youthfulness of your character, you wouldn't exaggerate this as much. You'll keep it relatively smooth. But for me, it's a little bit nicer of a shape to kind of follow the belly line like this rather than just a straight line like that. So for this character, we're not overly exaggerating that line, but it's still there. From there, I'm going to erase this portion of the spine. I'm going to follow my ribs down slightly, follow the back of my hip up slightly, and pinch in like that. And you kind of round it, like so. Just gonna bring this pinch up a little though. There we go. We want it basically to be around the belly button mark here. So if there was a line here, you're kind of trying to match it. Like that. So next, we're going to come back down here where the feet are, put in our little ankle mark. From here, I'm just putting in a foot shape. Then halfway point roughly is there. Now this time I'm not putting the kneecaps marks right here. I'm just going to put the oval just on the outside facing forward like that. That's because the kneecap is resting in front of the actual bones in your leg. So it's going to be outside of this middle section here, which is basically like the middle of the bone. From there, I'm going to keep in mind that the thigh is thickest kind of in the upper portion here. And I'm going to do the same for my hamstrings. From there, I'm going to swoop my calf out and in. And then just below this knee circle, a slightly concave line, like so. Now from here, you can readjust and balance your leg. Make sure it's nice and straight. want to make sure that this is all one nice shape. From here, we'll add in the glutes. So, for this character, they're not very thick. So we're just gonna pop them in like so. So you're roughly following our little spine line here. I'm gonna make this a little bit better just to show you. So roughly following this spine line that we put in, you're gonna keep it relatively flat at the top, but then it really pinches in at the bottom. And depending on how perky you want your character's glutes, you would just change that shape slightly. You can make it a little bit more rounded. But either way, it's going to always follow that. It's going to be hard curve at the bottom, and then it kind of mellows out at the top here. That's just the overall shape of the glute. So for this, she doesn't have a very large butt, so we're going to give just the tiniest line over the hamstring, like so. Next, from there, we can drop in our elbow. The elbow line is going to be just below the little rib cage section here. And I'm keeping my arm out of the way just so you can still see the curves of the character. From there, I'm going to swoop in from my shoulder. And then I'm going to drop in my pit. So what I like to do from the side here is I do a shape like this for the arm. That way it kind of, this little curve here is where the pit would be. Then from there, you can add a little tiny bump out, back in our forearm. This section's a little bit longer than what I would like. Drop in my hands. And again, just adjust the overall thickness of the arm as much as you want till it looks a little bit nicer to you. I'm gonna elongate, thicken the calf here, so it's a little bit more curvy. Then we can drop in the chest. So again, the chest is a teardrop shape. However, since it's unsupported, it's going to be a little bit flat on the front, then really curve in at the bottom. Kind of like the glutes, but that's because it's sitting on top of the rib cage. So it's slightly being pushed out. So, and that right there is basically it. So just make sure that the balance of your character is the way you want it. And if it seems good to go, then we can get into the line art portion. So again, I'm not doing anything fancy for the line art since this is just a figure study. So I'm just following my basic shape. So for this, I actually like to start at the arm here. So my tricep section into my shoulder and collarbone, into my biceps, like so. I think I don't really like my shoulder line here. There we go. That's a little bit softer looking. From there, oops, tiny little bump out for the forearm muscles. Nothing too crazy. Followed by hand placeholders. Then this little chest portion here. Top of my head. Into the nose, jaw. Again, not a face tutorial, so we're really not trying to get that exactly perfect. So that's why I'm just following straight line for the jaw. Normally you'd have like lips and stuff thrown in there. Next, curve the neck down, like so. And remember, you're not really going to see the shoulder blade or back muscles from back here. You have to have a pretty thick back to do that. So for this, we're just going to be binging this in. You could kind of see where the rib cage would be. And we'll add breast. Again, keeping kind of a semi-straight line and really curling in, so it still has that sort of water drop shape. From here, I'll start with my hips leading into the quads, leading into my kneecap, then tiniest curve to this for the shin. Then I'll add the glutes, like so, into the hamstrings. I'm gonna suck that in a little bit more. Trying to keep everything soft and rounded. I mean, remember that this portion here, the top of the hamstrings here is going to be a little bit thicker, so it's kind of like the thickest spot is here and here. And I can keep this line here coming down because it's kind of where the tendons are. But then go into my calf like that. This part's a little too thin. Bring it out into the foot shape. Then we just want to connect our stomach area like so. This will be our tummy lines. And there you go. So that wraps up our anime girl tutorial. And hopefully you find these poses helpful. Again, I'm just going for very neutral poses here. We're just trying to figure out the proportions for the characters first, and then we can get into more specialized tutorials on posing and just perspective, things like that later, including like face tutorials and such. But for right now, this is just drawing your classic anime girls from front, back, and side profile. So hopefully you found this helpful, and more tutorials to come later with different body types. So hopefully there'll be something in there that